Hello everyone. Now we will practice another problem from chapter 7 and we will now do E738A. So in this problem you will see you have a little table but some information you'll see are missing here. So first what we will do, we will try to figure out all these question marks. And based on that we can answer our questions. So this is actually on page number 424 and the problem is continued to page 425. So if you go to page 425 you will see all these requirements number 1 2 3, and under each requirement you have few questions. So first we will try to figure out the question marks or the missing information in this table. Again, it's about CVP or cost volume profit analysis, where you will use the concept of contribution margin. So let's read the problem. Ruby Company manufactures and sells a single product. Well, we actually don't know what the product is. It doesn't matter. The company sales and expenses for last year as follows. So their total sales is $150,000 and per unit sales price is $30. Variable expenses. We actually don't know what was their total variable expense, what was their total contribution margin. We just know what was their fixed expenses, and we also know what was their operating income last year. So now let's try to fill in these blanks or those missing information. So I actually made this table here. It's the same thing. We'll try to fill up this missing boxes. And actually we'll also get the same our question answers from our all requirements. It's the same questions that are asking for under requirement 1 to know all this missing information. So let's try to do the problem. Problem number E738A. So we see here their operating income is 16,500, fixed expenses are 13,500. So what could be their contribution margin? And that's actually the requirement 1, question number A. What is the total contribution margin? That means if we want to do number A, what would be the total contribution margin? Total contribution margin, right? So we all know our contribution margin approach income statement. We start with sales, we subtract our variable expenses. This is how we get our contribution margin. Then we subtract our fixed expenses and finally we get our operating income. So if I just want to focus on this later part of our income statement, we can write it down like this way. Contribution margin minus fixed expenses is equal to operating income, right? So that's what we did here. We always do it, right? Contribution margin, then we subtract our fixed expenses, and this is how we get our operating income. So we can just call it like this: contribution margin minus fixed expenses equal to operating income. Now we actually don't know how much is our contribution margin, but we know our fixed expenses and operating income. So we actually fill the other information and we can figure out our contribution margin. So contribution margin minus fixed expense, which is 13,500. So you see here 13,500 And if we subtract our fixed expenses from contribution margin, that will give us operating income. And in this problem, operating income is 16,500. Now we could do little algebra. We can just take this 13,500 minus with minus sign to the other hand of this equation, and it will be a plus sign, right? We did it's very simple middle school algebra. So 16,500 plus this 13,500. So these two together will give you the contribution margin, right? So I took the other 13,500 with this minus sign, and when we change the sides, when we take any part from one side to the other side of the equation, the sign will also be changed. So the minus sign is changed to a plus sign. So if you add these two, please take your calculator and do with me. I found our contribution margin is 30,000, right? That means we found here contribution margin is 30,000, and that's our question number A. Next question, what is the total variable expense? So we just figure out our contribution margin. Now let's try to do the variable expenses. Right, again, we know if you look at the first part of your income statement, sales minus variable expense is equal to contribution margin. Right, so I can write it down here, sales minus variable expenses is equal to contribution margin. Now we know our sales amount, which you can read it from here, 150,000. And we don't know variable expenses, but we also know our contribution margin, which we just figured out it's 30,000. So if we write down the information that we already have, we can figure out the missing information. Now what we will do, we'll try to change the sides. Right, so we'll take the variable expenses from our left side to the right hand side of the equation, and the sign will be changed. So it will be plus variable expense, or only variable expense, a positive term. And we could take this 30,000 from our right side of the equation to the left side, and we have to change the sign too. Right, so if we do so, it will be like this. Variable expenses is equal to, I just change it here. Now I'm writing this side first. Variable expenses equal to 150,000 minus 30,000. Right, so I change this one to the other side, and now it's a minus sign, and it gives me variable expense. You can check it, but you can easily see it's 120,000. So you can check with your calculator. Right, so 150,000 minus 30,000, it's 120,000. So we just found what is our variable expense. So I will fill up the table, 120,000. Now, third question, how many units were sold? Well, we actually don't know how many units they actually sold, but we know their total amount of sales, and we know what is the sales price per unit. So if we divide this total sales by the sales price per unit, we will figure out how many units they actually sold. So I'm trying to make it a little bit smaller. I actually zoom out this one so that we can see the whole thing together. So now number C is how many units were sold. So how many units sold? So we know this is the total sales price, right? So it's actually total sales divided by sales price per unit, right? And if you divide these two, you'll find how many units they actually sold. So total sales, so I can write it down like this. Total sales is equal to 150,000 over the sales price per unit is 30 bucks, and which gives that they actually sold 5,000 units. I'd say please check with your calculator. 150,000 divided by 30, that will give you 5,000 units. So they actually sold 5,000 units. Number D, what is the per unit variable expense? Well, now we know our total variable expense is 120,000 and they actually sold 5,000. So if you divide 120 by 5,000, you will get your per unit variable expense. So this column next to the total and before the percentage column, it's actually per unit information. So number D is talking about what is the per unit variable expense. Per unit variable expense is equal to our total variable expense, right, which is given here. Total variable expense 120,000 divided by number of units they actually sold, which is 5,000, and it gives 120,000 divided by 5,000. So our variable expense per unit is $24. So we got number D, 24. Now what is the per unit contribution margin? Well, we could do it from here, right? $30 is the per unit sales price. Variable expense per unit is $24. So we know contribution margin means sales minus variable expense. So if we subtract 24 from 30, we'll get $6. So I can easily write it down here that number E, which is per unit contribution margin, which is already here, but if you would like to show it, you could do it. $30, which is our sales price, minus $24, which is our variable expenses, and your per unit contribution margin is $6. So we just did number one requirement. We filled all this missing information. We answered all these questions. Now we have to calculate the break-even point, and it's in units and it's in dollars. So we actually did one problem, right? The problem we did earlier from chapter 7 is actually the same thing, where the requirement asks to calculate the break-even point, and we know the formula. So let's try to review the formula. Here is the formula sheet, and to calculate the break-even point in unit and in dollar, you need to know these two formulas, right? And this is the same formula you can also use for target profit calculations. So here we will use the formula, and remember, I actually told you many times, I'm repeating, if a question asks to calculate the break-even point in units, your denominator will be contribution margin per unit. If it asks to calculate break-even in dollar, your denominator at the bottom part will be contribution margin ratio. And we know break-even means operating income will be 0. So we will plug in 0 as our operating income. So let's try to do the first one, where it says question number 2, what is requirement number A, what is the break-even point in units? Alright, so we will use this formula, break-even point in units, and we will plug in the numbers. So I'm just copying and pasting the formula, but of course I'd request you to write down the formula a few times so that you can remember the formula. So writing the formula several times or making some flashcards would be really helpful for you to remember, because during the exam I'll not give you the formula. So break-even point in units. So it is actually fixed expenses, which you already know. Our fixed expense, if we go back here, our fixed expense is 13,500, or I could show you the other page, page 424. Our fixed expenses are given here, 13,500. And the questions are on page 425. So I will write it down. Our fixed expenses 13,500, and then I will plug in 0 as the operating income, and we also did contribution margin per unit, right? Because at break even operating income is 0, right? So now this is our top part of the numerator. Fixed expenses are given. At break-even, operating income is 0. Now we will divide it by contribution margin per unit. And we just figured out that our contribution margin per unit is $6. Right, so we will use that $6 here. That means it's basically 13,500 over 6. So I'm taking my calculator. You please do with me 13,500 divided by 6. And I found the contribution, the break-even point in units is 2,250 units. Remember, this answer is in units. Now let's do the break-even point in dollar sales. Right, so we now will use our second formula. It's the same formula, but instead of using contribution margin per unit as the denominator, we will use contribution margin ratio. I can show you the formula. So this is the second formula where we will calculate the break-even point in dollar value. Right, so this is the formula, and I will calculate the contribution margin ratio. So I'm going to the next page. I don't need to squeeze it, and I can make it a bigger if you could see. So now we are going to do the contribution break-even point in dollar value, right? So break-even sales in dollar, and we know the formula and we know all that information. Dollar value, it's actually fixed expenses, which we already know, 13,500, right? We used this one before. It's 13,500 plus operating income, but we know at break even operating income is 0 divided by contribution margin ratio. So let's go up. We need to figure out what is the contribution margin ratio. So it's actually given here. The ratio is 0.2 or 20, right? Oh, we missed one cell here. So here we still have one missing cell. Sales. What percentage is the sales? Well, sales is actually the 100%, right? And then we express our contribution margin and variable expenses in terms of sales. So sales is actually the 100%, and if you take our variable expense over sales, we'll find that 80% is our variable expense, and the difference contribution margin is 20%. So if you think this is your sales 100%, you could take per unit or you could take total. Then you could figure it out what percentage of it is your contribution margin and what percentage of it is your variable expenses. Say for example contribution margin. How could you do that? So your contribution margin per unit is $6, and your sales is $30. So if you do 6 over 30, you could figure it out. It's 0.2 or 20%. Same thing we could do variable expenses, which is $24. So what percentage is the variable expenses of sales? So if we do 24 over 30, you will find it's 0.8 or 80%. So sales is actually the 100%. Now we are expressing variable expenses and contribution margin as the percentage of sales. So it's given here our contribution margin ratio is 20% or 0.2. But you should know how to do that. I'm repeating. It's your contribution margin per unit over sales per unit, or you could also take total contribution margin over total sales, right? So if you do so, you will find 0.2, which is our contribution margin ratio. So when it asks to calculate sales in dollar value, you have to take the contribution margin ratio, which is 0.2, 0.2 or 20%. Oops. Or 20%. So that means we know our fixed expenses, operating income is 0. So you need to do little math, take your calculator, do with me, 13,500 divided by 0.2, and I found my break-even sales in dollar value is 67,500. Great. So we just calculated our break-even point in terms of dollar, also in terms of units. That means if the company's sales is 67,500, the company will start making profit at that point, right? Now we will do one thing, that's target profit. How many units must the company sell in order to earn a profit of $48,000? Right, it's target profit, right? That means how many units they need to sell. So it's asking about units, so we're gonna use the unit formula. This is the unit formula, right? So since it's asking about unit, it's the unit formula where the denominator of the bottom part is unit. It's just like it's the same like the break-even point calculations, but here for break-even we actually used $0 as our operating income, but now we have a target operating income. All right, so sales, so we will plug in that operating income, sales in units to reach target profit or target operating income is this formula: fixed expenses plus operating income divided by contribution margin per unit. So what is our fixed expense? We already know. You can see it from here, 13,500. Now we will add our target operating income. Remember, for break-even, we considered operating income is 0. We discussed when we went over the PowerPoint slides. Because at break-even, company actually does not make any profit nor make any loss. So operating income was 0. But now we have a target operating income. Operating income or profit, both are synonymous in this case. So our target profit or target operating income is $48,000. So I'm going to add $48,000. Now we will divide it by our contribution margin per unit. So can you remember what was the contribution margin per unit? Yes, it's $6, right? That's what we used earlier. So I can show it to you. Yes, it's $6. We did it here. Contribution margin per unit was $6. Since the question is asking about the number of units to reach the target profit, we will use contribution margin per unit as our denominator. Now let's do the maths. So your top part is 13,500. I'm using my calculator, plus $48,000 divided by 6. and that actually gives me the number of units, which is 10,250 units. That means if the company sells 10,250 units, they can earn this $48,000 operating income. And that was our requirement A. Good. Now B, C, and D, these are about margin of safety. So if you remember, we also discussed margin of safety. It's kind of the extra sales on top of your break even, right? So margin of safety could be in terms of units or in terms of dollar values. You can also express margin of safety as a percentage of your sales. So now we're going to use the formula which are in our third box. So now let's see. The question number B says that go back to the data given in the table. What is the current margin of safety? That means I will go to the other page. This is the table. What is the margin of safety? Right, so we need to see the table that has all information. That means we solved these at the beginning. So margin of safety. Margin of safety is what? Again, the extra sales. Excess sales you are making on top of your contribution margin sales. Right. So you can also express the margin of safety in terms of units or in terms of dollar value. So if you look at here, your contribution margin, your actual sales is 150,000 and your contribution margin sales was contribution margin in terms of dollar value of sales. We could figure it out. This is how many units you have to sell. Here we actually did it break-even point. So our break-even point sales is 67,500 and our current sales is 150,000. So this is now we will figure out the difference between these two. So again, margin of safety is the extra sales, excess sales on top of your break-even point, and you can also express it as units. So the break-even units are 2250, and right now company is selling 5,000 units. So again, margin of safety is how many extra units company is selling on top of their break-even units. That's what the question number B and C are asking under requirement 3. So let's do it. Now I will do number B. Go back to the data table. We went there. What is the current margin of safety in units? Right. So margin of safety in units. So again, margin of safety means the extra unit currently the company is selling on top of their break-even units. Right. So margin of safety in units. Expected sales in units, break-even sales in units. Right. So it's now given sales. So what's their total sales in unit divided by break-even sales in unit. So if you want, I can show you the formula here, but it's very basic. I hope you all will be able to remember it. Right, so it's actually the formula says is expected sales, but now they say to check the current sales. So I'll just modify a little bit. Current sales in unit minus break-even sales in units. Right, so now let's check current sales in units, and we actually figured it out that how many units the company is right now selling. We did it here under requirement 1 part C. The company is selling 5,000 units, and we also did it here. Their break-even units are 2,250. So we will just take the difference. So current sales in units is 5,000 minus break-even in units all are units. So if you do the difference, please take your calculator. 5,000 minus 2250, I got 2,750 units. So this is right now my margin of safety in units. Now we could do the same thing in dollar value. Margin of safety in dollar, which will be our current sales, the company's current sales, minus the break-even sales, and both would be in dollar, right? And that is our requirement C. What is the margin of safety in sales dollar? Right, so let's do it. Sales dollar. Okay, so it's showing the box here, so don't worry. So I can just put it here as number C, or let me go a little below. This is margin of safety in dollar value. Right, so it's again the same thing, but I would say the formula says it's expected sales, but I would say it's current sales, right? Because they want us to calculate the margin of safety in dollar value based on their current sales. So if you go back to their table, I believe current sales is 150,000, and if I subtract our break-even sales, which we found here, 67,500, we will find our margin of safety in dollar value. So current sales is 150,000 minus our break-even sales, which we found here, 67,500. So minus 67,500. Right. Again, margin of safety means kind of the extra excess sales, the cushion, right? How safe the company is on top of their break-even sales, because break-even is kind of the limit. If you go below that, you will make a loss. So if you make sales above that, you will make a profit. So this margin of safety is telling you the extra amount of sales they are making on top of their break-even sales, and it could be in terms of dollars or in terms of units. So let's check it. 150,000 minus 67,500, and I found their margin of safety is 82,500. Let's do the last requirement number D. It says that, go back to the table, what is the margin of safety in percentage? So you already have the margin of safety information. Now we need to express it as a percentage of sales, right? So you could do it into two ways. Either you could use the unit information, or you could use the dollar value information. It will give you the same thing, right? We already have all information. We have margin of safety in units. We have our current sales in units. We also have margin of safety in dollar. We also have current sales in dollar. So you could use either one, and both will give you the same result. So let's do the dollar value, since we already have this dollar information here. Now we are just expressing margin of safety as a percentage of sales. So margin of safety, if you see as a percentage of sales, it's actually our top part will be your margin of safety in dollar value, which we just calculated here, right? Which we just calculated here, 82,500. We just calculated here. Our top part will be margin of safety in dollar value, and that's what we calculated, 82,500 over our sales, right? Our current sales. It's not expected since the scenario is given, but it's a current sales. So now our sales is 150,000. So if I divide it by 150,000, we will express the margin of safety as a percentage of sales, right? So it's the percentage, 82,500 divided by 1/50,000, and I found it's 55% or 0.55, or you can call it 55%. Right, so these are the requirement we just did. It looks like a little bit long problem, but it's very, very simple, right? You need to know these formulas. And if you know the formula, it's not only you're going to memorize the formula, you need to know the concept of those formulas. Try to understand the formula. Then it would be easier for you to remember. So I already gave you the formula sheet, which is on Blackboard. Solutions are there, PowerPoint slides are there. We practiced 2 quick problems. So this week it's not actually a lot, and I hope you will practice your homework too. So please don't forget to do 2 homework problems, E742B and E759B, exactly what we just did here in video. So thank you very much.